So, I believe I've been asked about this series before. I know at least Guido has, one of the people who was requesting this. And as I was replaying it, I was like, wait a minute. I remember this game. Like, I'm not sure if I ever answered before, yeah, I've definitely played it. But having replayed it now for the Rumination, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. I had an old friend back in a while ago. Back when this game came out, called Vincent. He was really into adventure games, point-and-click adventure games. And he got me into quite a few of those, the Myst series, a lot of the Star Trek ones. And he pretty much is the reason why I know about the old LucasArts point-and-click adventure games. And, of course, he got me to play this one. So, I have actually played this game before, but not the second one or the third one. Which brings me to my next point. I have not played the second game or the third game, nor have I looked up any particular spoilers for either, so I'm kind of going into this blind. That was actually a deliberate choice on my part. I wanted to go in knowing the first game, analyze and discuss and speculate, and then we'll see what the second game does, and then we'll see what the third game does. What I am anticipating will happen is all my speculation I have notes on here will be hilariously wrong as we get to the second game and third game and all that fun stuff. Now, that being said, I do have a few bits of information that I know come from later games, because as ever, I don't just play the game, I also look into it, read interviews, that sort of a thing. And there was a lot of discussions from the gentleman whose name I'm not going to try and mispronounce, you know, the main face for the game, who was like, oh yes, I was discussing this, and I wanted this to end this way so that in the future game this, and you know, I want the series to continue, but it's not happening right now, you know, all that fun stuff. I'm not really sure where the series is going. I do, having just played the first game, hope this continues. It is a fun point-and-click adventure game. And that brings me to my first point. Why do we find these type of games fun? I was talking about this recently when I was streaming Back to the Future Telltale, or Telltale's Back to the... whatever. You know what I mean. The Telltale Back to the Future game, which is the most point-and-click adventure of the Telltale games. And as I was going through it, I was like, well, this is, you know, enjoyable in its own right. It gets ridiculous sometimes. And there were a couple points that I was actively stuck on and had to either look up or ask viewers for advice, but it was still fun. Now, I've never considered myself an adventure... I'm going to start calling them adventure games just to save on word count. I don't want to say point-and-click adventure game every single time. Okay. I've never considered myself a big fan of adventure games. Not really. And yet I've played a huge number of them. And I've gone through, and I've played all the way through a huge number of them. That being said, I just got to share, there was one particular point-and-click adventure game called Judgment Rights. It's a Star Trek one. And there was one puzzle, I don't remember the specific puzzle, but I remember it was the Trelane chapter, and I was stuck there. And I got so stuck there that I walked up and left the game for years. For years I walked away from that game until the internet started being more of a thing, and online message boards where they would discuss answers, you know, basically prototype game facts, started up, and I was able to go and say, hey, does anybody know how to get through the Trelane chapter of Judgment Rights? And a few people are like, yeah, you need to do this and this. Oh, okay. So with this walkthrough, I was able to finally beat the game. My point here is, why do we like adventure games? Why do I like adventure games, despite the fact that their gameplay makes me want to tear my... well, it used to make me want to tear my hair out. I got like a few scrubs there. I get like... Urgh. Because there's so much spaghetti logic in it. Now, that being said, having played through this game, I have to say this is one of the better, in terms of pure gameplay, adventure games that I've played. Because aside from two puzzles, only one of which is really noteworthy, I'll talk about that in a second, I never really got stuck in this one. I did have the walkthrough, but I started not looking at it because I didn't need it. I was just like, okay, I'll do this. Oh, he needs this. Okay, here. Oh, I'll talk to this guy. Okay, well, this was... And it all just kind of fit. It wasn't really particularly aggravating to play through, unlike a lot of adventure games I can name, where, though I'm enjoying it, I'm, you know, hair-tearing or referring to a walkthrough the entire time. And I think, and I was talking to Pax about this, I think the main reason that I personally tend to enjoy games like this is because of everything that isn't the gameplay. I know, hang on. There's two sides of the theory, okay? And I know it feels like I've said this a lot with some of my recent ruminations, but there's a lot of video games where I don't particularly enjoy the gameplay, but I still am willing to push through it for the story aspects of the game. And that is usually what I tend to consider the greatest strength of adventure games. The story. Now, you might think, okay, what the hell was the story of Monkey Island, for example? Well, the story was in great characterization and a tremendous amount of fun. It was really only those 2 points, but it was still there. There's a lot of personality to adventure games, at least the really good ones. And while they may not have particularly strong of all 6 elements of the story, 5 elements plus fun, they nevertheless have at least one of the elements strongly, and usually really focus on that element. I mean, Sam and Max, for God's sakes, just comes to mind immediately. Or how about, I can't think of the name of it. You play the skeleton gentleman after the Day of the Dead thing. I can't think of the name of it. I'm going to get 7,000 comments of people who are only going to say one thing in the comment, and everyone's going to say, it's that game! This happens every time. It's like with Witcher 3. Oh, did you know vampires don't need to drink? I got like 50 comments from different people. I'm going to look it up right now. Screw you guys. I disallow you to tell me what it's called. I'm going to look it up right now. Just for you. Because, damn it. Grim Fandango. Please don't comment telling me it's Grim Fandango. I remember really enjoying the personality, the fun, the enjoyment of these games. Usually there's a very strong emphasis on characterization, occasionally there's some very strong thematic significance, and there's usually a strong emphasis on fun. There have been some serious adventure games in the past, but for the most part they've all centered around those 3 major elements, in my experience. And this game's no real exception. The plot is not super strong, if I'm being honest. The characterization is phenomenal. There is a character arc. I'd say arguably just the one character arc for April herself. I'll talk about that more later. So there's at least some character growth in this game. There's a lot of setting building. This game has tons of setting building. I find myself interested to learn more about the universe, settings, worlds, whatever you want to call it, that this is set in. And there's a whole lot of themes going undercurrent throughout the course of the game, which I hope will continue in the future as well. But I want to talk about the other side of the gameplay thing, because putting up with gameplay to endure a story doesn't really sound like a ringing endorsement, does it? Let me start by saying that if you give me a book to read or a linear RPG to play, and both have the exact same story, I will enjoy the game more. This is just me in my opinion, but I get more out of the game because I actually played that game. Yeah, I didn't exactly do a lot. I wasn't exactly... I didn't change the course of the story, maybe the gameplay didn't sing out to me or whatever, or maybe it doesn't feel that interactive. But it is interactive, for me. I know the exact same argument can and has been leveled at, well, you have to turn the page, but I personally just don't derive the same enjoyment from turning a page as... and okay, maybe if I should go over there, I should level a little bit before I do the next session. Let me go do that. Okay, there we go. I wonder if I can get town. Okay, let's talk to this guy. Oh, what's he saying? I enjoy the interactive medium for storytelling more than I do any other medium. That's just me. That's just my opinion. So, no, I don't think that enduring gameplay to enjoy a good story is actually a derogatory comment. It may not be a positive comment, but I don't think of it as a negative. Not really. Not unless the gameplay is really bad and actually pisses me off. However, I did find myself enjoying the gameplay in a weird way of this particular game, and it reminded me of something I did enjoy of older adventure games. Some of them, not all of them. And that is the Tetrising of the puzzles. What I mean by that is, I need to go here. So I need to talk to this guy. I'm just going to make one up, because I don't want to go into specifics. I need to talk to this guy, so I need to... Actually, let's use a specific example. We'll use one early on. I need to go in here, so I need to get the cop to eat the candy, to be, like, weirded out, to spit it at the guy, to then be attacked by the guy, and then once the guy's gone, I have to go do a completely other thing in order to get the power to turn off, so he'll leave. Then I can get the toy and put it up against the lights, so that once that's done, I can ensure that I scare him into thinking that he's being attacked by the cop. It feels like setting up a series of dominoes, and then kicking them over. Does that make sense? I call it Tetrising, but actually I think dominoes is a better analogy, so I'm going to stick with that for now. It feels like I'm dominoing my way through the game, and I enjoy that sense of, alright, this. The because when it's done well, it really does have that satisfaction of all the pieces just clicking right into place. Which is funny, because that's actually one of the major overarching themes of this work, but I'll save that for later. I also want to say that this game, as I think I've alluded to earlier, has far less bad spaghetti logic, with one noteworthy exception. I want to talk about that exception. So like I said, I played this game back when Vincent introduced it to me, and I got stuck very early on, and then I put it down and walked away. When I played it again, I guess that would have been 2 days ago now, when I first picked it up. When I started playing it again, I'm sitting at like, okay, wait a minute, I know this puzzle! See, I have to get this key on a railroad track that's electrified, and there's this rubber ducky that's involved. Now, anybody who actually knows this game is probably just sitting there like, uh-huh, because this puzzle for this frickin' key is one of the stupidest things in the world, and it was so memorable that I immediately was like, I remember that. I even remember the specific screen. Visual memory. Aha, I know this place. Now, what's doubly funny is that I shared this with Pax, and his immediate response was, hang on a second. Then he linked me a Cracked article. It's a website that does theoretically humorous articles. Whether you find it funny or not is, of course, going to depend on individual opinion. But he linked me this article, which was like the 6 weirdest and stupidest logic puzzles, or something like that, in adventure games. And right there at the top was this freaking puzzle. I don't even remember all the steps anymore. This is one of the ones I needed the walkthrough for. It's like, okay, I need to go to loosen the clamp, to get the electricity, to melt the thing so I could turn off this and reinflate the rubber ducky. After getting the rubber... First I have to puncture the rubber ducky and get it going down the thing. Then I pick up the punctured rubber ducky, inflate it, and then attach it to the prongs so I can attach it... just so I can get a freaking key. I love it. I love it. And I was stuck there when I last played it and never got past that. I mentioned... well, let's move forward. So the next thing I want to talk about is that theme thing. I know this is a weird place to start with that. Well, no, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm going to make a note down here just to make sure that I talk about it. There we go. Let's talk about something else instead. Let's talk about the setting a little bit. So here we have 2 planets. One is logical and scientific, and also interstellar. There are quite a few hints that they are a... well, I wouldn't say a galactic power, but they're at least a local power. They have gone to other worlds. In fact, there's actually quite a few hints that Earth is pretty reliant on those other worlds, which is a fairly typical science fiction staple. AKA, we need more resources. Hey, other resources. Drag those resources back to the home world. It's not even exclusive to science fiction stories dealing with humans. It's a very common concept. Hell, the entire concept of settling colonies and exploiting them for their wealth is something we did here on Earth. So it's an easy concept to understand. But that started making me think, well, hang on. They split the world into 2, right? Where's the other one? Because they exist within a galaxy, which exists within physics and confines of logical narrative law, so to speak, right? They have other planets and other things. This isn't dimensions or whatnot, so where the hell's the other planet? I bring this up because one of the things I find myself wondering, especially with regards to the kin, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about, is did the divide between Mundaneville, I can't think of it, Stark, between Stark and Arcadia, just affect this one planet, Earth? Or did it split reality? And now there is a mundane universe and a magical universe. I kind of like the latter idea better myself, not only because it makes more sense to me personally, but because it adds a little bit of a possibility of motivation for the kin, the dragons, in other words. The kin just show up. They're like, hey, we're on Earth, what's up? And they find people in a world that is using magic and technology freely. And apparently that was a really bad thing. Because people, human beings who have access to magic and technology apparently just turned into a really bad thing. Yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, if we had access to magic and technology, and probably magic technology as well, then yeah, I could see that going really badly as time goes on. I mean, we don't have access to magic in real life, and again, we've had some pretty bad stuff happen in real life. So, okay, I'm with it. So they decide, split it up. Now, first of all, the dragons, who I'm going to probably just refer to either as dragons or kin, I'm not doing it on purpose, by the way, just have the ability to do that. To just be like, oh, let's just split reality. There we go. That was easy. Make a little sub-dimension, pocket little dimension where the Guardian hangs out. Set up this whole system to balance the two sides of things. But this brings me to the flaw in my earlier comment. If they did indeed split the universe, and that would affect wherever the kin came from, ergo going to that motivation thing I mentioned earlier, how is it that they only have to maintain balance on this planet? Now, there's two possible answers to that. First is the most logical, that they only split the planet. That there's the universe, and then there's Earth, whose magical half is over in Magic Land, over there. So, in other words, the only thing that actually got split was Earth, right? Okay, I'm with that. The other possibility is that there's a lot of Guardians for a lot of worlds. Or that the Guardians are dealing with more than just one planet. They just don't quite realize it. Now, that last part makes a little bit more sense to me, that the Guardians are dealing with the balance splitting out everywhere, because... And how do I put this? We know that some of the, I guess this is pure speculative, but we know that some of the magic essence of Arcadia was leaking out into Stark, right? What if that was leaking out on the colony worlds? What if they were seeing magical stuff? What if the ships or the space stations or the other things were seeing magical essences or dreams or things that were kind of shifting from one to the other because the balance was being destabilized? I just like that idea better. The idea of being on a colony on Mars and all of a sudden waking up and... Because you're on Mars, right? I don't know. Well, we'll see how that goes in the future. One other thing, though, speaking of speculative for the future... The Tyrants, I maybe just missed it, but didn't we just kind of leave that be? Like, the Tyrants were like, aha, we're going to invade Mercuria. We're going to invade, and we're going to crush them like a bug. It'll be doom. They will never be able to stop us. But the invasion doesn't actually happen. I really hope they follow up on that in the future. Anyways, let's move on. So... First couple of thoughts I had is that Arcadia seems to run on dream logic. Now, I've talked about dream logic before. A lot of tales run off of dream logic, mostly deliberately. In other words, things just kind of flow in a way that doesn't actually make literal or self-cohesive sense. It's like in a dream. And given the repeated motif of a dream, that makes sense that that would function that way. It feels weird, then, that they have a fairly normal and indeed mundane society existing within a world that follows dream logic, but there you have it. I mean, the idea of an alchemist being able to stop the wind by itself is kind of like, how? And how is the rest of the world functioning without the wind? You know, it just makes you kind of go, wait, but it's the kind of thing that, let me explain dream logic simply, because I bet a lot of you know what I'm talking about. You're in a dream, and stuff happens. Let's just not go into detail. Stuff happens. Then you wake up, and you remember the dream, and you think, what the hell? Because in the dream, it made perfect sense. But as soon as you wake up and you're thinking logically, well, that doesn't work that way, right? Now, I think this was a very deliberate choice on behalf of the writers, that this was something that was intentional. They wanted Arcadia to be the kind of thing that only makes sense when you don't actually think about it. But that makes it very difficult for someone whose entire job is thinking about it and dissecting and analyzing a work to then think about it. Like, there's a lot of things I could point to in Arcadia and be like, what, how did the... And I'm not sure how much of that was deliberate or not. I don't know. I got nothing. So I'm going to be skipping over Arcadia a little bit in terms of this analysis, because I don't have much there, except for one point, which I find very interesting. There's this thing about how people who are very progressive, driven, logical, people who are inventive, there we go, that's a good word, people, the Doc Browns of Arcadia, don't stay in Arcadia. They end up in Stark. I like that idea tremendously. It's a great way to explain how Stark has become so technologically advanced, to the point where they are, again, interstellar, whereas Arcadia is extremely stagnant. Despite everything, they are still mucking around. One of the things they comment on in Marcusia, I don't know why I keep screwing that, the town that you do most of Arcadia stuff in, the reason there's actually comments about how, don't worry, we're safe from siege. We've got a wall. That is so backwards, I'm not even sure what to say about that. Maybe that's more of that dream logic thing. But again, that's not safe. And, the whole tyrant invasion thing, I mean, we'll see how that goes, right? But my point is, it's probably one of the few settings that has actually bothered to bake into the setting a reason for the medieval stasis. A lot of fantasy settings do the medieval stasis, and very, very few of them bother to explain it. And of those, only I'd say about half of them bother to explain it in a way that makes sense. Usually, the usual explanation is, well, we have magic, we don't need technology. In this case, it's, we can't get technology because technology goes away when we try to use it. And of course, we've got this severe stark contrast thing, the whole chaos versus order thing. Quick aside, by the way, I do enjoy the fact that both chaos and order are portrayed as good and bad. I like that. It would have been really easy to portray chaos as bad, or order is bad, or chaos is good, or order is good. But instead, both are portrayed as just different halves of existence. Both have good sides and both have bad sides, and I enjoy that. I hope that also continues in the future. I also like the idea that, as a contrast to the fact that Stark gets all the progression, Stark also seems to lack the creativity. Now, I know that sounds like a weird thing since our main character is a frickin' artist, but there's a lot of dialogue in the game from the Stark citizens, and of course from April herself, that seems to indicate that they haven't really developed culturally the way we have in real life. And the implication there, at least as I took it, is it's because they literally lack the kind of imagination that chaos requires in order to allow that to come to be. They are too orderly. To explain what I mean by this a little bit, you ever heard of World War Z? The book, not the movie. I swear it just keeps coming up in my ruminations. I'm not doing this on purpose. One of the core tenets of World War Z is that the idea of zombies attacking was unthinkable. Now, I mention that because that is a significant key and indeed critical point to World War Z. If this was real life, and tomorrow a zombie outbreak broke out, we wouldn't be like, ah! We wouldn't be totally unprepared. We wouldn't be flipping out. I mean, yeah, it would be whacked. But we know what zombies are. We have fiction that serves as a barrier of defense against the unusual. So if aliens invaded, or mutants were discovered, or magic was invented, or any of these supernatural things happened in real life, yeah, we probably wouldn't believe it, especially at first, but we have capacity to deal with that because fiction has prepared us for it. Now, I'm not saying those things are going to happen, that's not the point. My point is, in most works of fiction, they don't have that barrier. So in World War Z, they never had the concept of a zombie. So instead of a zombie, it was, oh my god, this woman died but got up and started attacking me with her claws and her teeth. What's going on? No concept of what to deal with. Oh my god, there's a flying seaweed monster that spits cupcakes. How do you deal with that? You've never even understood that concept before. It's not even in your philosophy to think of such a thing, right? Which brings me back to Stark. Because there's a lot of things that we, in real life, look at in the game and we're like, yeah, okay. It's just normal. Now, granted, I'm saying this in 2017, but even back in, I guess that would have been 2002 when I first played this one? Something like that. So early 2000s. Even back then, I was just like, yeah, I got this, because I've played games before. I've read books before. I've watched movies before. I've watched TV before, etc. Fiction has created a barrier for me to be able to have ideas and paradigms to deal with these sort of things. But the game consistently and persistently reflects in its characters from Stark that they don't. There are so many times when all the characters, again, April herself as well, are like, Like, they don't even know where to begin with some of this stuff. There's even a point in the last area where April is talking to Adrian and says, we need to go save the world. The world's. God, can you believe I still don't really get this? And it gets across that idea. Because the whole thing has been doing it. Because, in my opinion, they have been deprived of one of the benefits of chaos in addition to the detriments of chaos. Which brings me to a philosophical question. Now, again, I have not played the second or third games. So I don't know if the games answer this, but in the context of just the first game, do you think it was a good thing that the divide happened? I mean, yeah, that Magitech Empire of Doom, but to permanently segregate the concepts of order and chaos from each other? To differentiate magic from technology like that? To completely alter progression on a planetary scale? What happened to the... They talk a lot about faith in this game. And the idea of, the variance between faith and religion is mentioned several times in this game. I'm getting a little bit into territory I usually don't like to cover. The variance between the idea of organized religion versus having faith in something is also shown as a sign of order versus chaos. In fact, at one point in time, Cortez says, yeah, I like going to this church, and she tries to categorize him. Are you Catholic? Are you Buddhist? Are you one of the new religions that have been springing up that are fictional? That kind of stuff. And he's like, no, I have faith. I kind of like that. But it also speaks to the idea that there is this thing in the universe that is deliberately maintaining this balance. They've pretty much flat out call it faith in the balance. Cortez himself, Red, if you will, flat out says, balance is something that I have faith in. But is that balance as a concept or balance as a literal? And I'm sure, did I just call him Cortez? Red. I'm just going to call him Red from now on. It's the kind of thing that Red himself would probably just roll his eyes at me for. Because it's like, yeah, so I'm trying to categorize it to it. You could tell which one of these two worlds I would fit in, by the way. I obviously have no imagination, and I want everything to make sense. But this brings me all the way back to my original point. And I swear I've been going somewhere with this. I'm trying to get more linear, ironically, with my notes lately. So hopefully I've been doing a good job. Let me know in the comments. I think that the kin themselves are... I don't want to call them crusaders, but they are effectively people who are very... missionaries. There we go. They are people who firmly believe in a particular faith. The faith of balance. The idea that there must be a balance between order and chaos. So they come to Earth and they find that that balance is out of balance, because the people are using both to ridiculous extremes, which is by definition not balanced. So they enforce balance. There's also a couple mentions of how eventually they'll go home and that kind of a thing, so maybe this is just something they do. That the kin go around from planet to planet, from civilization to civilization, and help spread the balance, help spread their particular faith of balance, and then move on to the next one. And if that's true, that leads more credence to the idea that they are just splitting planets into two, rather than the known universe. I digress. Moving on. I like the first 40 or so minutes of this game. I know this is getting a little bit back into gameplay, but it was kind of nice playing a very mundane adventure game. They do a lot to have a light dystopia in Stark. It's not quite dystopia. It's not Blade Runner. It's not Cyberpunk 2020. It's things are bad, but in a way that's completely believable in a kind of ordinary, everyday kind of a way. In fact, to be completely blunt, I could see real life becoming like Stark with relative ease. I mean, I could actually see that happening, you know what I mean, here, in real life. I could actually see, needing body scanners and temporary ID cards, and there's this great bit where there's this crashed hoverjet, or hover car, it's like, and I'm looking at that like, oh my god, and the woman is talking about the millions of dollars of settlement money will not ease the pain of what they've gone through, which is cynical. Then she goes on to say, no, only drugs or neurosurgery will help them with that. And I could see that happening in real life. Oh God, oh my loved ones are dead. All is well. You know? But I love it. They did a good job. They hit, ironically, a rather nice balance of having it be very believable, but still being in the future, and still arguably being worse than things we got now. Again, arguable. I also like... I like the fact that April doesn't follow the typical refusal of the call that you would expect in a hero's journey like this. Now, knowing the ending now, I could say what makes... I made that note early on. I could say with definitiveness, of course she's not refusing the call. She is arguably not the main hero, although I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But I love the fact that she's someone who, by all intents, seems to be pretending to refuse the call and constantly questions everything that's going on, and yet at every opportunity leaps at the chance to do something about it. Now, you could say that's because she's special, born to destiny, child of balance, all that fun stuff. Or you could say it's because she's someone who really wants this. Here's something funny to think on. Let's say you're put in a situation in real life, right now, tomorrow. Not zombies, that's horrible. But something like this, right? A dragon shows up. A mage. A elf. A Borg. Wait, not a Borg. That'd be terrible. You get my point, though. Something happens, and you are called upon to do something more than whatever it is that you're doing in your life right now. Your mundane life, right? They want you to live a fantastical life. Now, of course, people are people. But I have to imagine a lot of you would have at least the same type of reaction that I would. First thoughts are, I can't do that. I've got responsibilities, duties, I've got to deal with this. All these mundane things that we deal with in our lives that we consider important enough to be significant. But I bet at least some of you would also be thinking, man, that sounds awesome. And so even though you're trying to hold yourself back, at the same time you're thinking, God, I really want to try that. Or I really want to leap into that, And I got that very strong feeling that that's what April was going through. God, no, I don't even understand what you're talking about, and there's all this stuff, but, oh, that sounds so cool. And what's funny is they try to portray a realistic world, and yet this is still a much less horrible world than what we've got in real life. I don't actually want to talk about this, but to make it clear, if in real life a strange old man started offering to teach you about the wonders of the universe and stuff like that, there's probably something very, very wrong and disgusting that he has in mind. However, that's not true in the game, because the game is not as horrible as real life. Whew! Thank God for that. You get my point? So let's assume for a moment that life isn't that horrifically horrible, and you don't have to worry about crazies or weirdos or freaks or disgustings or perverts or anything like that. Let's imagine all that's wiped away. Now you have someone who's like, hey... Morpheus shows up. There's another good parallel. Morpheus shows up. Take the red pill or the blue pill. In real life, you say, oh, I'm out, because some weird guy's offering you drugs. But if you remove that aspect of reality from the equation and how horrific life can be and how paranoid and afraid we have to be of everyone at all the time, constantly, always, forever, no, really! News at 11. Then you might think about it, wouldn't you? If you didn't have the fear factor, or the jaded cynicism, or the stark reality that you've lived through in your real life, wouldn't you think about taking the red pill, I think it is? I actually don't remember which pill it is that allows them to trace you and get you out of the Matrix. You know what I mean. I also like the idea that there's all these prophecies. April just keeps generating titles and prophecies, a chosen one. And yet, it is repeatedly mentioned that prophecy doesn't mean jack. Prophecy is just, this might happen, or this could happen, but it has no actual power to usurp free will, I believe is the quote. And I like that concept. Too often, my opinion, prophecy is used as kind of a crutch in writing, and it's like, oh, this prophecy must happen, and this must happen. And what usually happens as a form of lazy writing, that was my elbow, is that people will say, oh, this is the prophecy, oh, but it was only a possible future, or, oh, it's one of many possible ways, or you misinterpreted, or whatever. Here, the prophecy is treated as, shall we say, logs to a fire. You're not going to have the bonfire if you don't have both the igniting match or whatever, the flint, and the fuel, the logs, the tinder, whatever, right? You need both elements. So if she did not choose and the prophecy did not exist, if both of these things did not happen, then these events would not have come to pass. But we did have the prophecy, and she did choose. And I kind of like that, because it gives you the idea that if she had just chosen no, well, none of this would have happened. No prophecy would have forced her along the way. This isn't Kingdoms of Amalur, for example, where you literally cannot escape your fate. Now, I have a couple notes here, but I'm going to skip over those, actually, because I think I want to sit on those for a future rumination until we get further, because they talk a lot about chaos versus order and the significance of what that means for both sides. I want to sit on some of those thoughts before I really start digging into the setting. While they do a lot of setting building here, I want to know more before I really start speculating. All I'm going to say right now is I have a very strong feeling that with the restoration of balance, we're going to see some significant effects on both sides. That we might... Because we know that chaos was seeping into order, but what I'm wondering is how much... I mentioned earlier how people who are innovative or inventive or whatever would go to Stark, right? Well, if balance is restored, would that stop happening? Would they start innovating and inventing again back in Arcadia? Would, with the chaos removed from Stark, would imagination bleed out? Would they no longer be capable of inventing or not inventing, wrong word, aspiring? April's an artist, right? Would artistry kind of go away, culturally speaking? I'm very curious to see the effects of balance being restored, because what we see is a balance that's been destabilized for centuries as of the point of the game starting. Everything's been bad for a while, and Adrian has been captured and imprisoned for at least years. So things have been accelerating and getting even worse, to the point where literally creatures from Arcadia start ending up in Stark. That's how bad things have gotten. So I'm very curious what the restoration of balance is really going to mean for the setting. And I think that will give me more fuel to speculate on the kin's actual motives and concepts. I have a couple character notes I want to hit really quick here. First of all, of course, we've got Gordon. Let me go ahead and first say that one of my few complaints about this game is some of the voice acting. Not all of it. Some of the voice acting was fine, but some of the voice acting was bland. Not a lot of tonality. And Gordon's a good example of that. Now I know what you're saying. Well, yeah, he literally had his emotions ripped out and turned into the Chaos Vortex. Yeah, I get that. But as I've said before, and as I will probably say again, especially since we're going to be covering Star Trek Next Generation and DS9 in the future, there's a difference between acting emotionless and acting boring. And in fairness, it is harder to act emotionless without acting boring than it sounds. But I always found the guy who played Gordon to just be kind of... what? Sorry. I was thinking about Gordon there for a second. But what I find interesting is that... and again, this goes back to that theme of the faith in balance. When Gordon is separated into his two halves, both are evil. Did you notice that? Now, when he's reunited, he's fine. He's actually a pretty decent guy, and he apologizes for everything. He says, thank you, and I've got to restore everything, blah, blah, blah. But both of his halves were quite evil. His emotionless half was, and his other half was just basically, stab! I find that interesting because it implies that every individual, everyone, even on an individual level, in addition to the macroscopic level, requires balance. If they don't have balance between the two sides, they turn into a monster, literally or metaphorically. It's a nice little touch. I want to talk about Westhouse really quick, because I get the really strong impression that he's going to come back in the future. Just because, as I was going through it, everything about him struck me as like, this is going to be a major NPC, and then he wasn't. I mean, yeah, he was relevant early on. He gives us the watch, which is just a little too convenient, and he doesn't really answer many of our questions, which is kind of suspicious. It felt like introducing, I don't know, I don't actually have a good example of this. It felt like introducing a character who will be significant later. I don't know. We'll see if that pans out in the future. I wrote down Jacob McCallan's name here, but I don't actually have a lot to say about him. I do have to mention that his plan seems dubious. Keep in mind, Mr. McAllen was one of the dragons who actually, excuse me, the kin, who actually helped the divide in the first place, right? He did that. Now, granted, that was forever ago. What changed his mind? I got the really strong impression that he actually was not the founder of Vanguard, but ended up joining Vanguard. That he ended up using his power and influence to push Vanguard to actually be a force and to really accomplish things rather than just a religious sect, effectively, who believed in reunification. And every impression I got was that he wanted the recombination to happen for personal goals. You know, I must control everything. But why? I feel he was too little fleshed out of a character for me to really speculate on. His motives are left very vacuous. I want to conquer the world, bwahaha, is not actually a motive. And there's no real discussion of the reasoning behind it, or why he thinks this way. And the fact that he almost clearly survived going over the ledge means I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing him in the next 2 games as well. So I guess I'll get my answers in the future. So I don't have much else to say about him. I do have a few things to say about Crow. I love Crow. Crow's awesome. Crow's amazing. He was adorable. He was silly. Crow himself best summarizes in a microcosm the game as a whole, because the whole game feels like a lighthearted, silly romp until things start to get really serious by the end. And I enjoyed that quite a bit. Most commonly referred to on TV tropes as Cerberus syndrome. You know, seriousness. You know. And I'm okay with that. I do like that in my stories, when it's done well, of course. And I feel they did a good job with it here. But my point is, Crow is this, silly, yeah, he's the... And then he gives that rant to April, right in the end, when they're in the Guardian's subdimension. He's like, you called me a crow, which is the stupidest thing. We're scared by people and straw and blah, blah, blah. And then she turns around and says, no, I called you Crow because of Crowboy. And she gives a heartfelt speech about one of the most ridiculous-sounding comic book characters I have ever heard of. And I've read real comics, and they're really ridiculous. But it manages to be serious and heartfelt and heartwarming all at the same time, and I loved that. I loved seeing that there was a real connection to that she did actually value him as a friend, and not just as a tool, and that he, in turn, valued her friendship as well. That kind of serious moment that you don't really see in a more lighthearted, comedic romp. I would say I hope he caught up with her at the end, but then again we see in the end with Alvany, Lady Alvany, that he did actually catch up with her. So that's nice. Also, that she's actually the narrator of the story. But I suppose I've been circling this long enough, so I'm going to circle it a little bit longer, because I just want to touch these last ones really quick. I mentioned I would bring this up earlier. One of the things I love about it, really good adventure games, is the characters. Specifically, the characterization. Now, to define this really quickly, the difference between characterization and character growth. Characterization is depth, layers, backstory, personality. Character growth is the change a character changes a character goes through. Story arcs with regards to a character, how they alter or mutate, or Luke Skywalker goes through significant character growth in the original trilogy, for example. Whereas Han Solo doesn't really go through a lot of character growth, but has a lot of characterization. I think that's a good way to parallel the variants there. Huge amount of characterization in this game. And I bring that up because there's a couple of names I jotted down here. Zach, Emma, Frank, and Flipper. All of whom came to mind immediately as memorable characters. Like, I heard Frank's voice later on, and I was like, oh my god, it's the frickin' cop. That poor guy. Or Emma and her obvious... Charlie. Charlie's another good example. The guy at the bar was like, hey, what's up? Most of the characters were memorable. To the point where I was actually like, oh, hey... I actually remembered several of their names. Zach especially was an interesting case since he was a bastard, and what made him most memorable as a bastard. But then when he steps over into actual bastardry rather than just having a mouth, he actually regrets it. He's like, I found that very interesting. And of course, Flipper was hilarious. I have nothing else to add to that. Flipper was a very interesting portrayal of mega conspiracy nut hacker guy who also happens to be in a hover chair. I also have to admit, this game was a lot more PG-13 than I was expecting to be. And there's a line that stuck with me for some weird reason, where she's like, look, can I do a favor for you in order to make this work? And of course, I'm playing a video game, so that makes perfect sense to me, because that's how video games work. I either have currency to buy an item, or I go do a quest. So what I'm asking for is a quest. And what April is asking for, in character, is a quest. But if you hear a young woman, who is 18, as it happens, in the canon thing, asking a man, isn't there a favor I could do to get this? You could see why he would presume what he did, and then, of course, immediately shuts her down because, no, I lost my legs, I don't have anything down there. And she's like, no! And her response is immediately, no, that's, God, no, I'm not, no. I wanted to help you with something, not, ugh. I loved that. But April herself is the star of the show. I gotta be honest, if for the absence of April, this game would not be particularly that interesting to me. It would be like, alright, here's the game, moving on. As is, I'm interested to see more because of her. She is, and I'm gonna have to coin a term for this, which I may end up calling Wind Waker effect. She is a very normal person, and I like that. She is not a destined hero. She does not have great powers. She's not an incredible mage. She does not have knowledge from beyond. She does not have otherworldly elements or crystals or ancestors or force ghosts empowering her. She's an 18-year-old art student. And that's it. The only significance is her ability to shift. Nothing more. I like that. I like the fact that she has to face what she has to face and fight against a very literal world-conquering plan and the destabilization of 2 planets as an 18-year-old art student. I want you to picture really quick when you were 18, or if you are 18 now, picture today. And you are suddenly called upon to do the feats that April had to do. Now I know in Japanese fiction that tends to be like, oh my god, you're an ancient veteran at 18. But seriously, think about it for a moment. I remember when I was 18. It feels like forever ago. God, we're almost at the 2-decade range, actually. Not quite there yet. But anyways, I remember when I was 18. And I remember the thought of having to do all this back then is just... I would try. But I'd probably fail miserably. But I love how normal she is. I guess I do actually have a lorium for this. A term that I use to describe things. She's an O'Brien. She's just an ordinary, normal, relatable character. And I really enjoy that. She comes across as someone who isn't just a viewpoint character for the audience, because she kind of isn't really. We're on board more than she is. She comes across as someone who is in way over her head, but doesn't let that stop her. And that is true heroism right there, in my blunt opinion. Which brings me to my next point. Despite the fact that the game seems to insist on the fact that she was not the chosen destined hero of doom, and, I mean, she wasn't chosen, in my blunt opinion, she is still the hero. The idea that she is not is laughable to me, and I'm sure some people will debate this, because she was not the destined one, she was not the guardian, she did not restore balance, except she totally frickin' did, because she's the one who went through all of that adventure to make that happen, and her reward at the end was either 1,000 years of emotionless turmoil, well, not turmoil, ordeal, or going home. And she herself admits, I don't know what to do with myself now. I guess I don't even know where to go. In fact, we don't even know where she goes. All we know is that she ends up with Crow in some hut somewhere talking to some kids. I bring that up because that goes back to one of my favorite examples of true heroism, Final Fantasy Tactics, where Ramza is the person who everyone hates and despises, and his name is stricken from most of the reverends, and he's referred to as a blasphemer and a heretic, and he saved the world. In secrecy and silence and darkness, where nobody could see it, but he still did it because it was the right thing to do. Whereas Delita, the incredibly manipulative, arguably evil Machiavellian backstabber, is heralded as a hero who unified the world and blah blah blah. April April is one of my favorite types of heroes. The type of hero who will do what is necessary, even though nobody will praise her for it, and there's no real reward for it. And will do so despite not having the power to back it up. Because, as the old saying goes, it is easy to be a saint in paradise, and, to be blunt, it is easy to be a hero when you've got ancient destined item number 75, and the backing of, the gods, or the crystals, or the chaos, or whatever the hell, right? Now, that's not to say April did this alone. She had a lot of help, but that makes sense too. How the hell could an ordinary person do any good without the help of other people, ordinary or otherwise? And that brings me to my final theme, which I did write down and I did remember to talk about. And this is probably my favorite theme of the work. You are a cog in the machine, but that doesn't mean you're unimportant. I love that idea, that concept. And it's present all throughout the whole work. There's so many people who are relevant to small events and large events that are going around as the story progresses. And there's no real one character who is the absolute crux of everything. Even Gordon himself, who is the guardian to restore order, is ultimately another cog in the machine of the story. But he is still important, just like April is, just like Red is, just like McAllen is, just like Crow is. Everyone played their parts and was significant for the overall furthering. And without one of those cogs, things wouldn't have turned out right or quite as well. If everyone didn't do their part, or to stretch this analogy a little bit more, imagine if you have a great machine that relies on hundreds of cogs. Let's say you remove one of them. How well is that machine going to continue functioning without that cog? Because the two cogs attached to it, or three as the case might be, aren't going to be working properly, or at all, which means the cogs that those are attached to aren't going to be working properly, and so forth and so on. You see the point? I like the presentation of mattering without mattering too much. It's it's kind of a nice balancing act, if you will. I don't have much else to share. I'm going to start the next game immediately because I really need to push through these this week. So I hope to see you guys next week with number 2 in the series. I don't remember their names. Their names are just so weird. When I was like, which one of these is in which order? I had to ask a friend. Anyways, I'll see you around, guys.